Joining us to discuss the latest on Ukraine is Samuel Ramani. He's Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Sam, we're now in our second month in terms of fighting in Ukraine. What do you make of this first month of this conflict?
Well, the first month of the conflict has not gone to plan from the Russian point of view. The Russians were originally planning on taking a blitz to take over Kiev and probably would have felt that they probably could have changed the regime by now and overthrown Zelensky. So the Russian recalibration of the military campaign towards the focus on Donbass and eastern Ukraine is a much more smaller scale and narrower set of objectives than they would have envisioned a month ago.
And so what is that saying about in terms of the length of this conflict, do you think?
Well, it shows a number of problems with the Russian military. It shows that they have relatively low morale, and they also were relatively unprepared for this kind of ground invasion. It appears as if many of the troops that were involved in the invasion were actually thinking that they were just going to hold drills in Belarus until February 20th and then leave. Also, they've blown through a lot of their precision weaponry, and they're relying on less precise weapons and munitions, and the strength of the Ukrainian Air Force, as well as the West's ability to supply javelins and NLAWs to destroy tanks, has been greater than Russia anticipated.
Samuel, we just had some guests on the heat from various locales in the world, and we had various numbers on how many casualties there are. What's the reality on the ground? I mean, you know, one of the guests said there's fog of war. That's why you get these figures and these figures. But what's your sense?
Well, it's really hard to tell. I mean, obviously, the Ukrainians are saying there's only 2,000 casualties. The Russian general today said that there were 30,000 casualties in Ukraine and 7,000 casualties in Donbass alone. The number probably lies, obviously, between those two extreme spectrums. There's also a lot of opacity about Russian casualty numbers. Until today, the Russians hadn't adjusted their statistics since the 3rd of March, when there were only 500 deaths. NATO estimates run at between 7,000 to 15,000 deaths. The Ukrainian estimates run even higher than that. But it's possible that the Russians have lost almost as many soldiers as during the entire Soviet war in Afghanistan, and the Ukrainians have probably lost almost as many people, or maybe a little less, than during the 2014-2015 war in Donbass.
So we just witnessed this NATO summit, Biden continuing his trip, but what do you make of it?
Well, I think that the NATO summit was a good opportunity for Western allies to show that they were united against Russia in spite of their continuing disagreements over energy-related sanctions in particular, as well as taking this up militarily. In particular, Poland's NATO peacekeeping proposal and the Baltic states, which have been backing a no-fly zone for Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania on Ukraine. Those more extreme military measures have not been supported by the U.S. or Britain, and on energy, the countries are all over the place. So the NATO summit was a good opportunity for these countries to show that they were united against the Russian threat, and they also were pushing back against potential Chinese assistance to Russia. But beyond that symbolism, I don't think much substantive has changed on the issue of energy or military action, which remain areas of disagreement.
Can we expect more talks in Turkey? I mean, are both sides closer to actually sitting down and trying to work something out, you think?
Well, Turkey has definitely offered itself as a convening power, and it would only really want to host the talks at this point between Putin and Zelensky. And the Russians have at least said that once Putin is talking to Zelensky, that's a sign that the negotiating teams that they have sent have basically done the deal. So it's just doing a signing ceremony on Turkish soil. So Turkey can act as a convener and have an important diplomatic role to play. Other countries in the region and elsewhere can also too. And in particular, Israel. We should watch for some of their messaging efforts as well.
And so likelihood of this kind of winding down anytime soon, do you see that or no?
Well, I think that the campaign, if it is pivoting towards Donbass, it could wind down sooner than we might expect. The Russian numbers show 93% of Luhansk and 54% of Donetsk are under the control of the separatist militias, which they've recognized as independent states. So they could be able to gain ground there if Mariupol falls, and if they get that land bridge between Crimea and Donetsk, which they just built today, consolidated. But if the Russians go back, and this is just a ruse, and they launch further offensives on major cities like Kharkiv, Kiev, we could be looking at a much longer war of attrition, much like Chechnya or even Afghanistan in the 80s. So it could end quickly, or it could end much more bloodily. Everything depends on what Vladimir Putin does next.
It's going to be interesting to watch. Samuel, thank you so much for your insights. Appreciate it.